In this tutorial, we're going to add buttons to a curved surface. So here we're going to add the buttons for volume and stuff to the side of this iPhone 11. The first thing you'll need to do is make sure that your orthographic views are set up. So I'm going to hit my spacebar and I'm going to check out the side view. So check which view is the side view, just click on your phone. And you can hit F to focus by moving your mouse over any of these views, and you can sort of see which view is the longest, which is this one. If you ever lose these 4 views, you can just click over here. Sometimes it just glitches out to this one view permanently, but you can click on this button here. So I'm going to spacebar into this bottom right view, and I can see that my image plane, I think it's facing the wrong way. Let me just check. So yeah, obviously this is going to be the top of the phone, this is the bottom of the phone, but this image is the wrong way around. So I'm just going to rotate this image by clicking on it. If you ever have trouble clicking on an image plane, you can drag select over the edge of it and it should select. Then I'm going to hit E. I'm now going to hold J on the keyboard. I'm going to hold J for a long time and then move this with one of these lines like that and all the way around. When you're rotating stuff, just make sure you move your mouse sort of from left to right and try not to move your mouse around and over the top like this, otherwise it gets a little bit glitchy. So just move your mouse right the way to the right hand side of the screen if you need to rotate your image plane. Holding J keeps it rotating by 15-degree increments. Now I'm going to spacebar back to my side view, hit W for move and move this up or down. I'm going to turn on X-ray shading so I can see through it. I'm also going to turn on wireframe on shaded up here so that I can see my geometry clearly and make sure that everything's lined up. Now if I zoom in, I can see the first button that we can do here. I'm on the side of the phone that's only got one button, so I'll get my edge loop tool from my shelf up here and I'm going to drag an edge loop on each side of the button like this. I'm giving it some space between the edge of the button and where the edge loop is. And then I'm going to create another edge loop. This is what I'm going to use to create the actual hole in the geometry. So I need to just give a bit of breathing room. So these faces here are designed to allow the edge loop to start to travel at wonky angles. Next, we need to create a template circle for us to follow. So to do that, I'm going to go to add a cylinder to my shelf. I'm going to go to create polygon primitives and make sure you have interactive creation ticked. And I'm going to put a cylinder on my shelf and click on my cylinder up there, and I can drag a cylinder out from the end corner of the button like that. Now this cylinder is currently 2D. I need to go to my 3D view to see where it is. I cannot hit F on the keyboard. There's a glitch in Maya where if you hit F when you're still creating geometry, it zooms out to outer space, so it's a known problem. Anyway, so you can hit 4 on the keyboard, zoom in to it will always be sort of in the middle line of the grid, and then you can just sort of make sure you're at a sort of 45-degree angle up here and just drag out your cylinder roughly like that, and then you can W for move and move it right to the edge of your phone. I'm now going to hit 5 and just make things shiny again. I'm going to hit 6 and then 7 on the keyboard. I'm now going to hit spacebar back to my side view. I want to reduce the number of faces on here on the edge of this cylinder. To do that, you go to your attribute editor, which is this button up here, or the vertical text that says attribute editor on the right. There'll be a tab called poly cylinder 1. Click on that and change your subdivision axis to 12. 12 is about as low as you can go for a circle, and keeping all your edge loops pretty neat. And I'm now going to move this circle so that the middle line is in line with the middle part of the phone, which should be the nearest line, which I'm just going to do this one. It doesn't matter if it doesn't exactly line up with the image plane, as long as it lines up with the middle line here. That's what's most important. And I probably can resize this up a little bit bigger, but that will do. Next, I'm going to just make sure it is not a cylinder and it is a circle. So I'm going to do spacebar to my 3D view, go to face mode, drag select all the faces at the back of the circle, delete them. I'm then going to select the faces over here. And if I try and stretch these out, you'll see it creates like a horrible shape. So if you do this, if you do edit mesh and go to detach, separates faces from each other whilst keeping them in the same object combined. So it's different from the extract tool, which will extract and separate the object. This extracts but keeps it together. So I'm going to do that and just kind of move it over there a bit. I'm actually not going to move this right the way to the end of the button yet because I want to stay zoomed in quite neatly, so we can stretch it out later. So as long as you have a rough sort of tablet tic-tac shaped button, you can stretch it out later on. It'll just be easier to work with, because Maya does this thing where every time you zoom out, it zooms out by 20 scrolls in, if that makes sense. So I'm zooming in once, but if you zoom out once on the scroll wheel, it does that. Very irritating. It's been in Maya for the last 10 years. Anyway, go to edge mode, select these 4 opposing edges, go to your bridge tool and bridge it. That's edit mesh and bridge, and that's joined together now. Now we need to try and get these lines to line up as accurately as possible with this shape. So I'm just going to get these 2 edges here. I'm in edge mode. I double clicked on those edges. I'm just going to bring them back over here. Okay, and double click on this edge and just join it up with the end of the cylinder there. So I'm now going to put this shape onto a new layer. I'm going to go to my layers up here. I'm going to go to, with the shape selected, click on the button over here that looks like a blue circle on a white plane. This assigns the geometry to a new layer. I'm going to just double click and rename it to button template. I don't think you're allowed spaces. And then hit save. I'm going to set this to T for template, or you can set it for R for reference, which is probably easier because you can see through it. I'm now going to go to vertex mode, and we want these vertices to line up with these. Now, we need to be sure that we do not move these up or down just like this, because we start to distort the overall silhouette of our phone, and it creates all sorts of problems with the reflections if we do this. So we want to turn on surface slide. To do this, go to the icon that looks like a hammer and cube up here, the modeling toolkit, go down to transform constraint and turn on surface slide. You need to remember to turn this off in a minute or things get weird. This prevents things from moving too far outside of the silhouette of the geometry, which is good. Once you've set that up, you can go back to your side view, and then you can use the arrows to join it up like that. Ignore this back line here, that's from the other side of the geometry. You should be able to hold V and snap, but there's another glitch in Maya that's not working either unless you use the arrows. So if you use these arrows, it kind of works, but if you use the actual bit in the middle, it doesn't work. That's another known glitch in Maya. There's a lot of known glitches considering this is like a beginner's level tutorial, but so that's going to go down there. I'm holding a V on the keyboard, I'm moving my arrows up like this to keep things accurate. Right, now when we get to this edge here, we are going to want to insert a new edge loop for this one. So I'm going to go to my edge loop tool just to show you, but I might just sort of put this geometry in here a bit so we can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to turn off my template for a minute, pop this bit closer to the geometry so I can see what's going on, and turn on my wireframe. Okay, so I want to add an edge loop through here. So I'm going to get my edge loop tool and just kind of drag it, through the geometry like this. If you drag it randomly to the middle-ish and do R for resize, you can kind of straighten the whole line out, then do W for move, and can then kind of move it back this way. You will then see that you've got quite a nice sort of top here to work with. So I'm now going to go back to my side view and do that arrow and just kind of drag that down there. Sorry, it's this one here. V for vertex, move them up roughly to the right place, then hold V to snap these together. Same with this guy here. Hold V to snap that together. So we don't actually have to do the other side. It might just be easier to just copy and paste this slice of geometry over there because it can be a bit of a pickle, but you can, if you want, move them over. I'm just going to show you how to copy and paste a particularly tricky piece of geometry and move it away. I'm now going to turn off the layer that has my button on it. I'm going to go to my button template and hit the V button on there. This is in your layer editor over here, so your channel box. And now I'm going to go to face mode. I'm going to delete these faces here. I'm also going to delete all these faces here as well. And probably this strip of faces here. They're all going to go. All right, so I want to get this shape mirrored over there as quickly as possible. So I'm going to duplicate my geometry, move it this way using the arrow. Make sure you do not accidentally move it sideways or it's going to mess things up. Use a blue arrow or something to move this way. Then select the faces that you want to keep. So I'm just going to carefully drag select these guys. You can hit 4 on the keyboard to make sure you're not accidentally selecting something at the back. So just orientate your camera so you can select something like this. I'm then going to zoom out and I'm going to drag select whilst holding shift. I'm going to hold shift now and drag select a great big box over my whole geometry while holding shift. When you let go of shift, you'll see that that's now inverted the geometry. So to invert a selection, the easiest way in Maya is to simply zoom out. So select a bit, zoom out, hold shift, drag select over everything else, hit delete, and then you can zoom back in. I'm just going to hit 5, 6, 7 on the keyboard. I want this to be resized the other way. Now the pivot's really far away from this geometry, so I'm going to go to center pivot on my shelf, or modify center pivot if you need to. And I'm going to do R for resize. Whilst holding J on the keyboard, I'm going to get the handle from the side here and drag it through itself like that. Alternatively, you can just go to the scale Y up here and type in -1, but that takes too long. So that was center pivot, R for resize, hold down J, snap it through the middle like that. And now I want to combine this with the rest of the geometry. So I'm going to hold Shift and hit the combine button. I'm then going to go to my edge mode. I'm just going to start to join these edges back up. So go to these edges in the middle, these three, join them up with these three. So that was holding Shift for these three. I'm going to keep holding Shift for these three. And I'm going to get my bridge tool to bridge it across. I can't just double click on this edge because it selects all the edges around the whole phone and that hole there as well, which isn't what I want. So just do them one by one, F to focus if you have to, and you can double click if you want to join the middle one up, but 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, hit bridge, and now you've got a sort of tic-tac shaped button hole in there. If you want to merge these two together, you can. I'm just going to make sure that my camera is always kind of pointing down, so I'm not accidentally going to select things on the other side. I'm going to drag select these, hit R for resize, and bring them together. There seems to be a weird problem with my resize tool. If you double click on your resize tool and hit reset, that should stop that from happening. That's better. After you've done that, you can go to edit mesh and go to merge. And that means that these vertices here are now single vertices, even though I merged them together, so that's good. Now you can finally drag select all these, go to your side view, and move these over to match the shape of the button like that. Next, we want to double click on the edge on the inside of this hole and hit extrude, and then hit W for move, because the pivot that it gives you after you extrude is sometimes a bit weird. So if you do hit extrude, you see a pivot's all at wonky angles, which kind of creates this weird trumpeted shape. So I'm just going to do W for move, which keeps things in line with the axis. If it's not aligned with the axis, just reset your move tool. I'm just going to kind of drag these in there like that. Next, I want to bevel this edge here. So to bevel the edge of this geometry, just double click around it like this. And then you will have to double click on the C-shaped bits separately. Go to bevel, drag the fraction down really low. There's a very sharp sort of edge on this. So the fraction is like 0.1. Or if you hold Control on your keyboard, you can actually make this very sharp. I might even do 0.05 like that. Next, I'm going to duplicate my geometry again. This time it'll teach you how to create a button from the shape of any hole in the geometry. So we create the hole first, and then we can make the button from it. We could of course use this geometry from earlier, but I'd have to then really sort of worry about where that goes and stuff. And it's good to be able to do this as a skill anyway, no matter what. Even if you're modeling like a Nintendo Switch or something, it's always good to be able to use this trick to have buttons that fit perfectly within the corresponding hole. So I go to face mode, Shift, double click next door to any of these faces. It selects the whole loop. I'll then zoom out, drag select the whole geometry that I want to delete, hit delete. It then keeps only the bits that I had selected earlier on. I'm going to go to object mode, click on this. My pivot's far away, so I'm going to hit CP for center pivot. Now I'm going to explain about the direction of faces. So each face actually only has a primary main direction, or a normal. You can see this if you go to shading and you turn on back face culling. You'll see actually this shape is almost inside out. So I just need to explain what back face culling is quickly so you understand this. So I was to create a cube here. From the outside we can see it, but if you go inside this cube with back face culling on, you should actually be able to see through the inside of the cube. So sometimes you notice that geometry goes pitch black, like jet black. This means the normals are inverse or facing on the inside. This isn't actually happening to my geometry for some reason, maybe because of the material I've assigned to it. But if you have black geometry, or you can see through your geometry, it means that you're inside it, or it's not facing the direction that it should. So you can see in this button here, because we duplicated it from the phone, it's actually the wrong way round, whichever way we look at it. So to stop this from happening, I'm going to go to Mesh Display and hit Reverse. I'm going to go back to my geometry here. Now we need to fill up the top area of this button. The easiest way to do that is to go to Edge Mode, and I want to, it might create some weird geometry if we just go and fill this up straight away. So I'm going to go to Edge Mode, double click on my edges. I'm going to go to Extrude, find the blue arrow and pull the blue arrow inwards to create this loop of faces. This will give our bevel room to breathe later on if the geometry in the middle gets a bit weird. Now, to fill up the hole in the middle, the easiest way to do it is to bridge it together. So I'm going to double click on my edges there. I'm going to hold down Shift and say, no, not you, and no, not you, and hit bridge. These will all bridge across very neatly like that. I'm just going to spacebar a minute to the top view and check the shape of this button. Indeed, it seems to be at some kind of a wonky angle. This is because the geometry was curved and it has to have this sort of shape at the end of it. I do not want this on the button. So I'm going to go to vertex mode, drag a box over these vertices here. Sorry, my image planes then were causing an issue. If I just turn that off a minute. I'm dragging a selection box like this over there. I'm going to do R for resize, and you can crush all those vertices together into one straight line. You can resize vertices to make them straight. It's a very common thing to do. I'm going to spacebar back to my 3D view, and this button's pretty much set to go. If I sort of slide that neatly in there, I'm now going to go to edge mode, and I'm going to bevel this edge here. This edge would have quite a bit of a larger bevel than the phone here because it's a button. So I'm going to go to my bevel tool, and I might just give that a segment of 2 to create something like that. I can't quite tell if the button is actually larger in the middle. Let's just say it is for a minute. So what you can do, if you want the button to sort of bulge in the middle slightly, you can double click on the edge loop in the middle. You can hit B on the keyboard, and B turns on something called soft select. You can also get there by double clicking on your move select tool and go to soft selection, and you can change the fall off radius in here as well, so that you end up with something where it's yellow in the middle but a little bit dark, sort of like red around the edges. The easier way to control that is if you zoom out and hold B on the keyboard, that's B for brush or something, you can then sort of resize this in, and it's a lot more intuitive to hold B and drag left click and drag your mouse like this. You're aiming for a fall off of something like this, where the middle is sort of very hot yellow and the rest isn't, and then you should be able to do W for move, and you can give this a slight bulge like that. This is obviously an optional step. I'm pretty sure that looks good though. You need to make sure you turn soft select off, or it might annoy you later on, so you can tap B on the keyboard for that to then go away. So we've now got buttons on the other side of the phone as well. We've got 1, 2, 3 more buttons. So imagine if we had to do that all over again, we'd lose the will to live. So if I combine the button with the geometry for a minute to keep this as simple as possible, I'm going to select both the button and the geometry here, the edge of the phone. I'm going to hit combine. I'm then going to duplicate this, Command D, move it to the other side over here. I'm going to go to face mode. I'm going to do the invert selection trick again. This time, I want to really carefully select the button. So if in doubt, select more than you need, otherwise you're going to have some problems. So I'm just going to drag select all of this. I'm going to hold Shift and say, no, not you, and no, not you. So I'm just holding Shift to drag boxes over these two here. I now can invert the geometry, again, by holding Shift and dragging a big box over these guys, like that, and then hit delete. It leaves you just with the button on its own, like that. I'm now going to spin this button around with E for rotate. The rotation pivot's far away again, so I'm going to hit CP for center pivot. As I rotate this, I'm going to rotate it while holding J. So I'm going to hold J right now. Then, while I'm still holding it, I'm going to drag the equator line of this rotation tool. I'm going to move my mouse towards the left of the screen. Do not move your mouse around the pivot like that. Just move it to the left of the screen or to the right to rotate it around. You could of course change the numbers manually over here, so it's 180. So I'm going to move that into position. You may also notice if I turn my lines off here that some of our faces look like the reflections aren't lining up properly. You can almost see like the edge there, and it might get really sort of, you might worry if you've made a horrible mistake, but don't worry, this is perfectly normal, especially after you've been bridging. This is to do with the under mesh display, if objects have a soft edge or a hard edge on them. So if you go to mesh display, soften edge, you'll see all the reflections are then perfectly smooth like this. This is how low poly games like GoldenEye and the N64 got away with super low poly characters, because they just used a soften edge on them. So now we're going to sort of line this up with the phone. This might be very difficult to do. I could spacebar to my side view here, zoom in a lot, and just try and line this up as accurately as possible with the side of the phone. Like that. I hit spacebar and go back to my view here. Now I'm going to line this up with the other side. So I'm going to spacebar now, and I want to see the top view. We could change the side view here to show the other side. I'm not going to do this, but if you did want to, you could hold the spacebar and you could click and hold on Maya, and you've got a choice either to do the right view or the back view, etc. But we're not. I'm just going to go to the top view for this one. and I'm just going to line this geometry here. So I'm going to click on the button, and I can see there's a small button here. So if I move this down to line up the bottom of the button there, and then go to vertex mode, drag select these vertices here, move them down. It's kind of difficult to see. I can try and zoom in a bit more if I want. I'm just going to line up the button roughly there. I know my button comes further out than their one, but it will do. And I'm going to go to object mode, Command D for duplicate, move this button up here as well, like that, and go to vertex mode, drag select these vertices to make sure they match. To be honest, these are the exact same size anyway. And finally, duplicate it one more time for the very small button at the top up here. And I'm then going to go to vertex mode, drag select that cluster of vertices and move that down to there. We can center pivot just for a laugh, but if I spacebar to my 3D view, we've now got the buttons on. However, they are not joined up properly with the geometry. So if I go to create an edge loop just randomly here, so it's easier for me to bridge later on, I don't have to look too far away. I can just now drag select these faces here, hit delete. And then I'm going to go to object mode, shift select these three and the main geometry, hit combine or mesh combine, and they're all one object now. Now I can go to edge mode and start to bridge edges together. I can't double click, but I can click on the topmost edge here, shift double click on the bottommost edge, do the same on the other side. So that's click on the topmost edge, then shift double click on the bottom edge there. I was holding shift the entire time there, sorry. So hit bridge. If that didn't work for you, just check this out. So you do click on the top edge, you then hold shift and double click on the bottom edge. Whilst still holding shift, you can click on the new top edge and still hold shift, double click on the bottom edge, then hit bridge. I'm just do the same over here. I could merge vertices together, but I'm just going to bridge these ones like that. Super. You can again see that we've got problems from our soften edge thing here. So if you click on your geometry and go to mesh display, soften edge, it might even now be a good time to add these to your shelf. So you've got soften edge and harden edge, and you can click on soften all edges, and the reflections should look quite smooth. So congratulations, you've now added buttons to your side of your phone. This did take like a good 25 minutes to do, and you're probably wondering why I didn't just use Booleans. I'm going to make another video on this anyway. I'm going to show you what Booleans would do. Okay, so most tutorials that show you how to make holes in geometry would tell you to do this, to simply get the shape that you want to cut out the geometry by, intersect it with the geometry. I'm just going to turn on my occlusion so I can see the contact shadows here. In fact, it might be easier if I just turn on my default materials button temporarily, which is a really good trick when modeling. You can just, that's this button here, just turns on temporarily, Lambert 1. I'm going to put that over there. You can select the geometry you want to be cut out by first, and then the geometry you want to cut it out with last. Then you go to Mesh, Booleans, and you can click on Difference. And you can then see a hole was just suddenly made in our geometry like this. And you think we spent like 10 minutes making this shape. Why didn't we just do that? The trick is here, if you were to smooth the geometry out, for example, if you were to hit 3 on the keyboard for smooth preview, you can see how horrible the geometry looks like when you do that. And if you were to go to mesh and properly smooth the geometry like this, you can see what an absolute chaotic shape that you get here. No one can ever use this. This isn't professional. So the hundreds of videos on YouTube saying that you can use Booleans, they're good, but they're not professional. And you can never really sell geometry that's been made using Booleans. You have to do it the old-fashioned way, like this. So don't use Booleans. Also, just to mention, when you're smoothing your geometry out later on, either by hitting 3 on the keyboard or when you go to mesh smooth, you might notice that the shapes of the buttons get slightly ovaled at the top and the bottom. They're not quite as straight lines as they used to be, which makes them look a little bit inflated. Now to stop this from happening, I'm going to hit 1 there. I'm going to go into my edge loop tool, and I really should have put in some more edge loops. So I'm just going to drag in some edge loops here and here. This stops the smooth curvature going beyond the edge of the corner really. So it goes through the corner and sort of then will straighten itself out there. So if you hit 3 after doing that, the button should look a lot straighter than before. So if I zoom out, you can sort of see how this button has a straight top and bottom while this one is still bulged like that. If you hit 2 on the keyboard, if I just turn on my default shader for this, if you hit 2, it does kind of show you the geometry in kind of halfway between 1 and 3 modes. If you go to your edge loop tool here, you can actually put in an edge loop like this and then watch the smooth geometry update. The rule I follow for this is I always try to create this edge on the top about as far away as the next edge on the corner over here. So I'm just going to drag these in like that. And I really should be doing the same thing on the button. I did kind of forget this step from earlier. But this prevents your straightened shapes from becoming oval shapes. If you want these to be symmetrical, you could of course double click on your edge loop tool up here, say I want multiple edge loops 2, and if you want to be super accurate with this, you could do that and then say, right, I want 2 there, 2 there, and then you go to double click on these guys to resize and drag them out so it's all perfectly equally spaced apart like that. So you can do that as well. Great, so now when you hit 3, everything should be having straight edges on the top and on the bottom as well. The next tutorial will show you how to do the cameras up here on the back of the phone. This might be the most difficult part to do, but it's a great way of showing how to quickly fill strange shaped areas and create camera lenses and stuff like that.